And so I've been considering, you know, Passover in the past, kind of Passover in the future. And I shared a message, I think a Passover ago or so, a year or two ago, about Passover in the past. It's the same, or Exodus in the past is the same as the Exodus in the future, because God works that way. He wants us to know, if we look to the past, then we can have an understanding what's going to happen in the future. And we can know that just simply by looking through Revelation, all the prophecies, and Isaiah with Christ and everything. We can know that what he told us in the past is going to happen in the future, and events that took place in the past help us understand the future. And so here's a fun quote. Let's see, how can I do this? I will just. How useful this is. This may not be really useful, but my idea here is that well, it'd be good if you could see it. I know that's a good thing, but that's pretty big. Well, I guess you can read that. Okay. Let's try this one. Okay, so Ellen White says in Education, she says, the history which the great I Am has marked out in his word. So he wrote out all that history, right? All that stuff that's happened already. He wrote out all that history in his word, uniting link after link in the prophetic chain from eternity in the past to eternity in the future. It tells us where we are today. So he wants us to know, if we kind of look things over, we can have an idea what's going to happen, right? Right, that's what Revelation's all about, revealing, right? Revealing a Daniel, revealing a lot of stuff. So we can know what's going to happen today in the procession of the ages and what may be expected in the time to come. And all that prophecy has foretold as coming to pass until the present time. It has been traced on the pages of history, and we may be assured that all which is yet to come will be fulfilled in its order. So he wrote it out because he wants us to know, and you have to excuse me because I got Junior here this morning, and Mommy's at work, which is a whole nother story, because Mommy had her contract specified she didn't need to work Sabbath, and but since we have this issue now, well, she works Sabbath. So I get Junior today, huh? Yeah. Because things change. Just like Pharaoh's talking about here. He says, you want the people to rest from their labors, from their burdens, and to go worship in the wilderness? He said, no, I don't think you need to be doing that. You need to be here working. And he makes it even harder for them. So there's that quote. So things in the past indeed foretell the future. And then here's another fun quote. Let's look at this one. Now this kind of parallels our situation today, kind of. Or you could say the wild calamities and stuff that occurred with the Passover of the Jews in the past, like with Titus and whatnot, would reflect that and parallel today. While those things aren't as horrible as they are today in any way, I feel like today this scenario, this pandemic that we're experiencing, which isn't really a pandemic, will be a much worse situation in the future. Like we were talking about last Sabbath, it's like a testing. It's like it's a little time of trouble, little issue. Yeah, I know, buddy. Yeah, it's got to shoot. So she goes on. She says, "Terrible were the calamities that fell upon Jerusalem when the siege was resumed by Titus." Yes, it was siege by Titus. Maybe someone else can read this. Somebody else want to read that? This is about the Emperor Titus and how he came to Jerusalem and he was going to conquer Jerusalem. And this is what happened to Jerusalem, God's people, at the time of Passover. and you can read that if somebody wants to.
I can read for you, Chris.
Okay.
The city was besieged at the time of the Passover when millions of Jews were assembled within its walls. Their stores of provision, which if carefully preserved would have supplied the inhabitants for years, had previously been destroyed through the jealousy and revenge of the contending factions. And now all the horrors of starvation were experienced. So fierce were the pangs of hunger that men would gnaw the leather of their belts and sandals and the covering of their shields.
Hmm.
Husbands
pretty
farmed
good.
their wives and wives their husbands. Children would be seen snatching the food from the mouths of their aged parents. The hands of the pitiful women have sodden their own children. They were their meat in the destruction of the daughter of my people.
Yeah.
And you know, Chris, that's one of the things that caused the Roman Empire to collapse.
Okay.
Chris,
Yeah.
you seen that there where it says resumed by Titus? They
Yes.
first went up there to attack during tabernacles. Then they left for 3.5 years and Titus came back to finish the job. Josephus talks about that in great detail also.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. When Seth just came, and then Titus. Yeah. Yeah. I know. See, when you look at the events, if you just study the events and then look at the time frame, the timeline, it's all actually on God's timeline. So it is it is a good thing to recognize these holidays in the Bible. So yeah, so there's a lot of horrible stuff. There's a timeline, and then there's Passover, and like Keith said, there was tabernacles, and there was the starvation. So we kind of can parallel those things today. And there's hunger. You know, some places are more hungry than others, right? I'm not hungry. I'm doing quite fine. But sure, we've seen with empty shelves, because this is with very few empty shelves, because it's not a big deal. But in the future, there would be more empty shelves, couldn't there? So people are so hungry, you know, that they were doing things like gnawing their leather. Yeah, heavy phone. Gnawing their leather, their belts, and even the leather on their shields. And then they were robbing people. It got so bad they were robbing people, and even snatching the food from who? Everybody's just hungry. They don't know what to do. They don't have the food they need. And so I was looking at some stuff this morning. So as you can see there, you know, she explains that people are robbing, snatching food, even from their aged parents. And then you kind of look into our time, and you can see that independent, elderly Italians robbed or shopping by young people on scooters, no less. I think that happens in other places too. Yeah. But you know, as you can see, elderly Italians, because they're easy prey. So that's just another parallel of the times that we live in.
Oh, Chris, you know, we're just talking about history ignored will repeat itself.
Yeah.
This morning I was reading about the Roman Empire, and it said during the latter years of the empire, farming was done on large estates called latifundia that were owned by wealthy men who used slave labor. Today it's called agribusiness.
Yes.
Yeah. And at one time it said the emperor had to import grain to feed more than 100,000 people in Rome alone.
Right.
Those people all lived in big cities. Nobody was farming. So that was part of the problem.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And Ellen White talks about slavery in the last days and whatnot. And I don't know exactly what that entails, but we do have slavery around the planet, especially in third world countries, and And even here, like you're saying, you know, it's a lot of agriculture with people coming up from the south and helping out.
Well, I saw yesterday on the news where the farmers with is blueberries and squash, their crops are ready to harvest in 2 or 3 days, but the people are hung up at the airport. They can't get here to pick the crops from Guatemala and South America.
Gotcha.
And the farmers said, well, the Americans, they won't do this kind of work anymore. They're not going out and do field work. It's just the way it is. So all the crops are going to go to waste.
Right. Yeah. Those folks in the U.S. don't want to be doing it. I know. I had never seen. I'm always thinking about that. I never seen the folks like around in the Central Valley out there. I don't see the white folks going out there and picking oranges. I've never seen that actually.
Yeah. Well, back in the old days they did, but then they got real jobs and moved on.
Right. Yep. So and then I got to thinking about the about Matthew 24 a little bit, and you know, we've seen that a lot. But I'll share it again. You know, it talks about Jesus says, "You shall see wars and rumors of wars, but the end is not yet." And I've just been looking for little things here and there. I don't know if you saw that one tweet by Trump with the Iranian sneak attack or whatever. I thought that was, I don't know, I thought that was kind of unusual. Unusual, huh? Yeah. I don't know how many times he says something like that, but it was peculiar. I hadn't seen a tweet like that. But yeah, anyway, there are wars and rumors of things, lots of rumors going all over the place. I think it'll get a lot worse, of course. Yeah.
You saw people when it first started this virus thing, like over toilet paper. Yeah. People upset because other people had loaded up their cart and emptied the all the water and the toilet paper out of the stores.
Yeah.
Fighting.
All right. Yeah. Toilet paper's gone. Yeah.
I seen a story yesterday, and I noticed that all the turnips and Brussels sprouts are still.
Yeah. Funny. Yeah, I remember the first time, and all the potatoes were gone. Like, I guess people really like potatoes around.
I'm curious why they were stocking up, filling their carts full of milk and eggs. Now, how long are they going to last? How long can you store those?
Yeah, right. I know, huh?
That's not my doomsday ration.
Doomsday hoarding. I know. I've seen people hoarding eggs, and they freeze the eggs. And I've had a frozen egg, and it's okay, but it's not. It's really weird.
But does it lose any of its food value after it's been frozen for a year?
10 years, probably, huh? So yeah. Anyway, I think I think personally we're entering a period in U.S. history that's quite different from the past. But I'm not very old, so you know, I haven't been through a lot of presidencies and administrations and whatnot, but it seems unique to me. So that's a little more evidence. But yeah, I know, but you guys are gonna have to hold on to some. I gotta find him a Papacy, huh? Because he can't live without a Papacy.
Okay.
Here you go. Good job. Yeah, Papacy. That's the plug that makes the day all okay. So anyway, after all that, I was looking a little more at Matthew 24 again. We'll just share that a little bit. Maybe somebody can read that too.
Nation will rise against nation, famines, pestilences, and earthquakes. All these are the beginning, I think it says, of birth pains. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and you shall be hated of all nations.
Yes. So, I was looking at the nation rising against nation. Do we have that exactly? Maybe not. Do we have famines? Or should we have famines? Do we have pestilences? Maybe we do. Maybe we have a little more at the moment. But what I was thinking is that these things are the beginning. So when you start seeing these things, you might expect further things to occur. Those things and earthquakes, and then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted. So it's like a step-by-step process.
And Idaho just had a 6.5, and they're not used to having earthquakes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and again, I think it's this event, which may not be such a big event, is a testing time and a good time for us to recognize that these things could be much bigger next time, and the reaction from the public could be much greater and politically greater. And I was thinking about Randy Brims and how he had his message on will Adventists be blindsided? Because Adventists have been so aware of so many things, but can Adventists still be blindsided? And I think certainly a lot of Adventists will be blindsided, because a lot will fall away, as she says, and a lot will.
Well, Chris, one of those things they're going to be blindsided is because a lot of the pastors are telling them these things have all been fulfilled. They aren't telling the people they're going to be repeated.
True. Right. Yes. And considering that a lot of people fall away, I was looking at Thessalonians and what Paul says, and he says, maybe somebody can read that one. Paul says this. What does he say? Who wants to read it?
Be not soon shaken in mind or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there be a falling away first. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie.
So, so he wants us to know that let no man be deceived, even though there is going to be a falling away, and there is going to be a delusion, and a lot of people falling away for this delusion. And I was looking at some other things concerning these delusions and these
and when it says God
people
send
that
them a delusion, that means it's coming through the church.
Yeah, true. Yeah, well, that's very true. Ellen White does talk about the church and Sunday observance. And here's part of this falling away and this wandering after the beast, as the Pope explained. Let's see, was the Pope drops traditional titles, including Vicar of Christ, April 3. And you wonder why would he drop this name, this replacement of Christ, or this place of Christ? who's representing Christ. And well, in this article, it was interesting because it explains, it says, in the latest Vatican yearbook, this yearbook, the title Vicar of Christ does not appear on the listing for Pope Francis. And it goes on to say, such a change would undoubtedly have required the approval of the pontiff. And then you're like, well, why? And well, they give you an idea. Down here, it says, in the 2006 Pope Benedict the 16th dropped another traditional title. He dropped this title, the Patriarch of the West. Okay, but the Vatican explained that the elimination of this title could prove useful to the ecumenical dialogue. So it's a very useful thing for this church to drop a title like that because of the dialogue and the benefits that come from that dialogue. And in some messages that I put together, maybe for Passover, depending on what happens, I talk a lot about these keywords like dialogue and common, a lot of common everything, common home, common plan. But he's always talking about this dialogue with other churches, and as you can see, it's what he's been doing for 3 years, 4 years, with a lot of different denominations, a lot of people politically, a lot of dialogue, a lot of uniting ecumenical dialogue.
Yeah. Well, now he could be one of us.
Yeah. Or hey, we could be one of him, right?
We can just all get along.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm no better than you are.
So yes, he definitely wants to unite us and bring the people back to the universal church, right? Because he is the head of the universal church on earth, in place of Christ, the victor of Christ. Then looking a little further, so you can kind of see what he's up to. Looking a little further, White's explain something here. She says, maybe somebody can read this one. Yeah, no.
You're muted.
Harvest. Satan sweeps away the ripening harvest, and famine and distress follows. He imparts to the air a deadly taint, and thousands perish by the pestilence. These visitations are to become more and more frequent.
So more and more frequent, that's kind of what we were talking about with whether it's a pandemic issue or it's the earthquake issue or it's other things, fires and whatnot, conflagrations. They will be visited with more frequently. And this air, a deadly taint, is quite interesting. And what's involved? Well, there's famine involved and distress. The distress of the nations right now is high, and famine. Well, in a worst case scenario with something like this or whatever it is, there's a lot of people hoarding stuff, especially food. It's a big issue. So sure, famine could be an issue. So that is very interesting. But even more interesting was the fact she goes on to say that the destruction will also be upon both man and beast. And I don't know if you heard a little bit about the, I think some cats and some ferrets, they were getting this specific problem. And so people were wanting people to know it wasn't a big deal, but that it was happening. Because sure, things happen like that, right? but I was also looking through the Spanish flu in 1918 and how animals were getting sick and horses were getting sick, and they were testing horses. And then I was reminded of the fulfillment in Egypt when both man and animals died. So a lot of parallels occur, even though this is just a smaller issue. The future issue can be bigger. So both animals and men die in the future, she says. So I got to thinking about the whole Passover fulfillment, all the fulfillments of Passover, the events on Passover. And I was thinking of 4 or so. I was thinking of the Passover in Egypt when the plagues occurred and death, right? We had death at the very end. And then the Passover freedom from the tyranny of Egypt. And that's certainly a fulfillment or an event on that time. And then of course we had the Passover with Christ on the cross. And that's another event or fulfillment. And then we also have, like we were just talking about, Passover with the Jews in Jerusalem as the emperor besieged Jerusalem. And most of the Jews, well, they experienced this famine, this pestilence, and the starvation, because it all kind of goes hand in hand. And to boot, that was Rome. And what do we face in the future? We face Rome besieging the U.S. basically, as we wander after that beast, that little horn. And then, of course, like I just said, we look in the future, in the Passover in our future. Will it be just before Passover with the certain 7 with the 7 last plagues in the future? Where the 7 last plagues fall. I think the timeline is possible. Maybe other people have other ideas, which is great. So looking at the whole Passover issue in the past, we can see that there's events and there are fulfillments, and our future may also have this Passover time in the future with events falling on it like it is now. So then I was looking towards this thought. So what did he desire for his people in Egypt at that time when the Passover, when the plagues were occurring in Egypt? What did God want? What did God desire for his people in Egypt? What did he want them to do with him in the wilderness? Moses, like I said at the beginning, God wanted his people to go into the wilderness to worship. And like we were explaining from Exodus, that Pharaoh said, you're relieving these people from their burdens to rest. And that's not good. But that's what God wanted. God wanted the people to leave so they could go to the wilderness and rest. And maybe we'll read that, because I don't know, we should go through this whole thing. Well, we should go through these things at home or on here or whenever and read some of these things in Exodus. If somebody wants to read these things, this is about Pharaoh and Moses and the Israelites and how they're trying to get out of Egypt, like maybe our future will hold, trying to get out of this world or the cities, or if someone wants to read that.
Exodus 5, verse 2. And Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. And they said, the God of the Hebrews that hath met with us, let us go, we pray thee, these 3 days, journey into the desert, and sacrifice unto the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence, or with the sword. And the king of Egypt said unto them, why do ye, Moses and Aaron, stop the people from their works to rest? Get you unto your burdens. See, God wanted his people to worship him only. He wanted them to rest. He wanted them out of the cities of the wickedness. He wanted them safe from pestilence. But Satan and Pharaoh would have us burdened with works and pestilence instead.
Yes. So what did he want? He wanted them to work. And you can go in the future and you can see that, well, you can hear and you got pestilence. Let us go and sacrifice unto the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or the sword. And you can look in the future at Revelation 13. This is 15. And it says, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should speak and cause that as many would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So anyway, there's a parallel there as well, as these people in the past had, you know, do we want pestilence and the sword to fall upon us? Well, in the future we have pestilences we're seeing in Matthew 24 and in Revelation, and in Revelation we also speak of being killed. So anyway, I think God does want us out of these cities. So I was looking a little further and found an interesting, another interesting article on the rhythms, history rhythms. And this article is explaining kind of what we're looking at, the past and the future, because it wants to look at history and how it repeats or rhymes. And it explains that. Maybe somebody can read that if they want to. They can read, well, maybe I'll read this. Yeah, I better read this. Within weeks of the pandemic shutdown will draw to its inevitable conclusion. We must have passes, right?
I agree.
There is a, you know, unfortunately, we don't have those. Maybe they're being hoarded, or he threw them off the ledge. I don't know. But within weeks, this pandemic will draw to its inevitable conclusion that life will settle into a new normal. Is what these people had to write, a new normal. And let me look a little further here. At least one societal change resulting from quarantine could do wonders to invigorate our national sense of family, faith, and community. So at least there is one societal change in our community due to these quarantines. And what could be good? Well, they're talking about it reinvigorates our everything. And it goes on to explain that, it says, let's give serious thought to reinstating at least some of the time-honored Sunday closure laws, sort of a 1 day per week modified stay-at-home request. Now this article, this is April 1, 2020. So someone thought this was a good article for this time. I think a lot of people do, and I think a lot of people look at the benefits of, you know, taking time off, just like the Pope explained, whether it's for the ecology, you know, it's good for the earth, or whether it's good for family, or whether it's good for the the whole virus situation, stay at home as quarantine, because that's a benefit, right? Of course it is. But it goes,
Chris, I think Boston is one of those, or Massachusetts is one of those that has a lot of those Sunday blue laws on their books.
gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, and that's another thing I share in these messages, hopefully at Passover, is the fact that a lot of countries have these Sunday rest laws, and especially Europe, as we know. And the Pope is really, really urging a lot of that stuff, along with endless Catholic bishops and whatnot, and Catholic politicians. And eventually he's going to conquer our country as well, and we will submit to that beast and wander, because that's prophesied to happen. Also, let me see what else is here. There's a little bit more here that's interesting. It says such action would rededicate our society to a regular day of rest and family meals and civic associations and religious observances, because that would be good. And it says by rededicating each Sunday as a common day of rest, we would say that the life of America is much more than never pausing commerce and ever grinding bureaucracy. And that's another, this must be a Catholic individual that's hoping for the best, but indeed, this specific Pope Francis speaks a lot about consumerism. And if you look a little further into that, you'll find that it wasn't necessarily Pope Francis. Well, it was Pope Francis to do this, to be part of this, but Pope Francis took the name Pope Francis because of the former Pope Francis, which was wealthy, but he was very much so against consumerism and helping the poor. And he wanted to be just like that. He wanted to eliminate this problem of this capitalism and this consumerism. And the solution for that is the whole Sunday rest issue in his encyclical that everybody talks about. So, as we go on talking about Pharaoh and the rest that God wanted for his people, and then you see our future here talking about rededicating Sunday as a common day. And of course, common day is another key term the Catholic community wants to use. Then I was looking at something else. I was looking at see what the Pope had to say about pestilence. What is he saying? Or what has he said? One of the things he said about this issue is not found, but it is found in this link over here somewhere. Maybe over here. This is the Pope, and he is saying something. Here's the article. Pope Francis blames coronavirus on nature having a fit over environmental damage. So he says they're very both intertwined. So, remember, it's his job, and I'll explain this in just a minute, with why he has to connect all these things. Why does everything have to be about this right now? Why he has to build the problem so he can provide the solution, which is Sunday rest, which he has explained to our Congress. He's given to our President Trump. He's given to the European Parliament. He's given all over the place. And then anyway, I can go into the Jesuit general and how it was his idea, and I'll explain that as well. But what this title explains is that the Pope is blaming the coronavirus on, well, us and our environmental damage of our planet. And he goes on to say that let's see where he said it. March 24, Pope Francis told a Spanish journalist on Sunday that he believes that the coronavirus pandemic is nature having a fit, right, in response to environmental pollution. And he goes on to say that fires, earthquakes, that is, nature is having a fit, so that we will take care of nature, right?
Oh,
I
Chris.
know, and I can harp on it and harp on it and harp. Yeah,
And now they have photographic evidence in this shelter in place, how pollution is cleared up. They can see from satellite that pollution
yes,
is cleared up now. All we got to do is stay home.
right. Yes, and that is in my message as well. The fact that they have statistical numbers now to prove that, you know, these Fridays for future and Sundays for future and Earth and everything, they have an effect on a very minute effect on CO2 levels and all that. So,
Well,
you know, yeah,
I remember back in the 60s before California really clamped down on the smog laws, that they had big signs on the 10 freeway in LA, pull over and shut off your motor. The pollution was so bad, people couldn't breathe.
yeah, I believe it. I believe it. It's better.
Well, you come into LAX and you can see like 4 or 5 different layers, different colors of smog, yellow and brown, and just black, and just you can see the layers of smog on the airplane coming into LA.
Right. Yeah, it is a problem. And that's just more evidence to the fact that, hey, we need a solution.
Yeah.
And somebody has the solution, and he has a very big platform to provide that solution from.
Right.
And let's see, I think there's a little bit more in here that you might want to see.
They should be there. Over here from it. I mean, and then go over there. It's totally up to you.
Something's happening over there.
Yeah, we try. All right. Bye.
Oh, here we go. Let's try this. Okay, there's a little bit more here. Let me show you this. So it goes on to say here in March 24 that the Pope's attribution of the coronavirus pandemic to the environmental damage is keeping with the strongly environmentalist eco-theology he has been promoting during his pontificate since the publication of, yes, that encyclical Laudato Si. You know, a lot of people harped on that, but in reality, it is a big issue. But even more so, looking further in this article, it goes on to say that, let's see what else it says. It goes on to say that in particularly, yes, at the recent Synod of Bishops for the Pan-American could use one of those passes, huh? There you go. Let me see here. Yeah, he says some more interesting stuff here. It says, particularly at the recent Synod of Bishops for that whole Pan-Amazon region, you know, when they were getting all uppity about taking care of the Amazon and all those people over there and burning Amazon and everything, which tended to displace spiritual concerns with environmental ones, because that's, you know, there's more evidence to prove his point and secure that solution of rest. And it goes on to that last November, the Pope said that he hoped to add the ecological sin against our common home to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. He says that we have to introduce, we are thinking about it, to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the sin against ecology, or the ecological sin against, the key word again, common home, because a duty is at stake, the Pope said. So, you know, he wants to push this so far because this is his spiel, this is his thing as Pope, to provide this solution of Sunday rest, that he has to build all these little pieces of evidence so that the public will say, hey, yeah, this is a good idea when that event takes place, whatever that event is. And eventually as the man of sin is revealed. So it talks about that ecological sin, which is wild. So he wants to place that in the catechism with all the other perversions that are in there. And so, okay, so I want to explain a little bit more. There's not too much left. But the reason, so he provided that solution, right, at Congress with the Laudato Si encyclical, which I explain in detail in the messages, which solution is Sunday rest. And when you look at, let's see, let's go over here. You look at that a little further, you can see why he's doing it. Why is his name Francis? Why is he pushing this agenda for saving the world through this Sunday rest? And it's, well, one reason is because of the Jesuit general who provided information. It says Pope Francis approves 4 priorities for the Jesuits next decade. So there's 4 priorities from the Jesuit general, which is this guy here, and here's the Pope. And so the Jesuit general provided these 4 things that were to guide the Jesuits in their next 10 years from, well, I think that was somewhere around there. I think it was around there, February 19, 2019. And these are the priorities. And so basically you have spiritual exercises, and when you look into Catholic spiritual exercises, it's good and bad. But then he also wants to look into, busy boy. Number 2 is the poor, right? So what do we have? What have we been dealing with? We've been dealing with the migrants, the poor. You know, he's always talked about the poor. You know, popes have always spoken about those things, but indeed this migrant issue has been really, really wide. The outcasts of the world, got to take care of those people. People that are violated anyway, and justice for all those things. And then he goes on, the Jesuit general explains about the young people, to accompany the young people in the creation of a hope-filled future, because they don't have a hope-filled future, you know, because the world is falling apart and it's going to end, you know, in whatever years because of CO2, blah, blah, blah. And so the young people have to be helped. And they need to understand. And then you can look over here, and this is, you know, culmination of the care for our common home. So these are 4 things that the general says, hey, all Jesuits everywhere need to be explaining these things. And, you know, a lot of Catholic people look up to the Jesuit priests because they're informed and they're educated, and, well, we need to care for this common home, right? So the Pope says, indeed, I'm a Jesuit also. I need to also take care of our common home and all these other things that the general has expressed. So it's just more evidence. And yeah.
that they're about the poor. That's what that Identity 2020 is all about, is so that the poor can have an identity so they can start banking and not be so poor.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I know there's a lot about people doing a lot of stuff with identities in this country, basically. Which I'm not sure the details or the depth of this, but you know, in North Carolina, we don't have to show IDs to vote in the election. I didn't understand that. I felt that was going to be an issue, a problem. I don't know if that's the case everywhere or how common that is, but I don't think that's been common in the past. Maybe in the, I don't know. Anyway, so not having an ID, yeah, an ID is, you know, it's beneficial for some.
Well, in Davos last year, they said 20% of the world's population does not have an identification to do commercial business or, you know, do commercial stuff. So they wanted to start giving them a birth certificate so that they could start, you know, won't be so poor.
Yeah, right. I got you. Yeah, sure. Taking advantage of the poor that way is very useful. It's done that way. So yeah, so they all have an underlying rhythm with this, you know, these 4 priorities from the Jesuit general, with God and justice and young people and care for the common home. And to me, it sounds exactly like what is happening right now. And sure, you know, that's also why he wrote them. But they're taking advantage of this entire situation. Whether they created it themselves or not is another story. But they will resolve these issues. So I think, you know, eventually Sunday rest is inevitable, according to these things and what the encyclical was about, and everywhere he shared it. And whether this situation is a pandemic or the next, we can see, you know, what people are doing in this testing time before it all happens for real. We can see that there is well, maybe I'll read that. But anyway, there's scarce food, right? Barely, but there is in few places. Pandemic, that word is constantly used. We have pestilence in the Bible. Distress of nations, you know, that's what Matthew 24 speaks about, is the distress of nations. And then we have, well, the whole issue with the media blowing everything out of proportion, with the pestilence. And then further evidence with the fact that the Pope is explaining the issue with the environment and with the virus, you know, putting them together, just more evidence that they are on a path and they want to provide that solution. Anyway, okay, here's one more thing or so here. Here's just some articles that I was looking at after reading and watching some stuff this morning. This is April 1. It says that when Earth demands a Sabbath, learning from the coronavirus pandemic. Oh, I'm supposed to use that word, huh? Okay, so what it says here. I need this. What about this? This is a book. It says here somewhere that it says that so it goes on to say that the Earth demands the Sabbath, this article says, right? And how we're going to learn from this coronavirus. I said it again. This might be the first time since the beginning of the industrial age that Earth is finally getting a break from the relentless activity and a growth of human industrial production. So we're finally
Chris?
getting a break. Yeah.
Chris, could you
Yeah.
possibly enlarge the screen just a little bit, because the small words I can't read on mine. One more time. There you
Yeah,
go, right
yeah,
there.
I can.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. So just another article with some interesting aspects for this current time in our history. Sure, we're having a break from the relentless activity, just like the Pope talks about, all the consumerism and buying and selling. It's a problem. And that's another quote. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's in my message about the specifically buying and selling that the Pope has explained is a problem. You know, it's funny that he actually says it that way. So just more interesting stuff. And then there was a quote here by Ellen White, and she says, again and again, the Lord has instructed that our people to take their families away from the cities. And I think that is a good thing. And I think a lot of us are out in the country, out of the cities and into the country, where they can raise their provisions for in the future. The problem of buying and of selling will be a very serious one, right? And we were just talking about that, right? There was hoarding and there was things, food was, shortages were occurring in this little time of little bitty trouble. For in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one. We should now begin to heed the instruction given us over and over again. Get out of the cities into rural districts where the houses are not crowded and closely together, and where you will be free from the interference of enemies. And she goes on to say that educate our people to get them out of the cities into the country, because that is important. Oh, buddy. Oh, boy. Probably nap time, huh, buddy? Oh, boy, poor buddy. Here you go. And, oh, boy, it's only a little bit more. Should I quit or should I keep going with a little more? Not sure.
So
Yeah, just keep going, Chris.
Going.
Okay. Look at that. There he is. Hi.
Go find his little passy.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he might have thrown it over the edge or something. Yeah.
Does everybody see my face, or my face not on there?
Can't see
Is your
Mark.
face on there?
How do I
don't
get my
see your
face to
face.
show up?
Marvin, we're not
I'm sure
really
you have
seeing
one.
anybody. We're watching Chris and his shared screen right now.
Okay.
Oh boy. Oh boy. So I get those. Well, yeah, I'll go on here. This is just another article of a few articles here. Amid this pandemic scare, Americans flock to remote land survival retreats, right? Because that's just inevitably what happens, right? I mean, you think about taking care of yourself and your family, and you want to get food like these people, right? And then you want to leave the cities because, well, in this time it's not so bad, but in the next time maybe it could be worse. So we go to the cities, which is another reason Ellen White says to head on out to the cities. Not to mention you can grow food and you can teach your children to grow food, and that is a very, very good thing to tend the garden, right, buddy? And then you can look a little further here. And this is March 26th, I think, 2020. These are more people fearing of the pandemic, African city dwellers flee to the countryside. And so they're having issues, sure, and they do the same thing. So people flee, right? So I'm just kind of going through the scenario of the past, like the Passover. All those events took place. Even the fleeing took place, and the fleeing takes place in Revelation as people flee to the mountains, and all the other parallels. And this is another interesting one. The Guardian speaks of the coronavirus pandemic measures could cause global food shortage, UN warns. So again, not such a big deal for you and I, right? But if it was a bigger issue, sure, it would be a big issue. I think it says something here interesting somewhere. It says that while the supply of food is functioning well in most countries at present, problems could start to be seen within weeks and intensify over the following 2 months as key fruit and vegetables come into season. These types of produce often have short ripening times and are highly perishable and need skilled pickers. You got to have the pickers, right, to work quickly at the right time. So you got to have those people doing that stuff. And then it explains that we need to be careful not to break the food value chain. Now, I don't know if they're speaking of the cost and whatnot, the value and the logistics, or we will be looking at problems with fresh vegetables and fruits soon. So they're trying to say the UN was speaking of those issues and the value, how things could be more costly or whatever, and then people aren't doing their jobs and aren't growing the foods and all that jazz. And I suppose in those situations, then the government would have to impose lockdowns, right? And they would have to take care of the people. Oh boy. So then they get involved and they get overbearing, right? But here's another one here. And then we're gonna have Abel share something, right? This is another article by the lovely New York. Will the coronavirus threaten our food? They say. Sure, maybe they want to blow it out of proportion, right? But these articles could be really, really true in the future sometime. Then I was looking at some other wild things that have happened here. You're a wild boy. And I think some of you have seen some of these things with the well, at least articles and media and whatnot speaking of these things. With some of the big box stores. And well, they always want me to do that, don't they? Anyway, some of the Walmarts and Targets and Costco's, you know, they do not stock, or they're not shelving and selling non-essentials. So big box stores, including Walmart, Target, to stop selling non-essentials in Vermont. Now, why exactly? I don't know exactly, but I know that that it's occurring, which is interesting. But I just, if you look a little further, you can see. Let's see here. That items such as toys and clothing. Oh no, buddy, no toys, no toys. And clothing in aisles of Walmart, Target, Costco will go elsewhere to find them. You have to go other places to find those. And then there's an interesting conversation down here explaining. Well, that's not going. explaining well, anyways, it's a conversation explaining, saying, oh, this was with the county emergency management officials. There's a question. Someone asked, can you buy plants and seeds to garden at home? Because sure, those things could happen, because I think even in here somewhere, they were explaining the fact that gardening supplies is not an essential thing, and sporting stuff, clothing, toys, electronics, jewelry, gardening, those are non-essentials right now. So, well, in these stores anyway. And so you kind of start thinking about seeds or whatever, you know, to plant some food, or you want some food in that manner for your garden and whatever. So this other conversation comes up saying, can you buy plants and seeds to garden at home? Asked the to the county emergency management officials. And they said, well, that's an non-essential activity necessarily, and there would not be deemed an appropriate use for those. So gardening at home, plants, so those are, sure, those are non-essentials, plants and whatnot. So anyway, that's just kind of diving in deeper and deeper, which I'm just saying that in the future, right, if we're going to parallel situations like Passover and whatnot, sure, those things are going to happen in parallel. And look at this situation now. Yeah, and then yeah, and I just had some more thoughts in Revelation 13. You know, it talks about the this man is not would worship the image of the beast, right? You got to honor the beast rules. You got to do as they demand you to do. If you don't do that, then, well, you should be killed. That no man might buy or sell. So there's an issue of buying and selling, right? And here is an interesting article about not being able to buy or sell, especially in a situation like this when you're running out of stuff, right? And then anyway, that goes on and on. Yep. Anyway, we should probably wind down. Huh? And then there's another interesting article explaining the perfect storm that U.S. Facing hunger crisis as demand for food banks soar. So it's just more interesting stuff regarding the situation we're in that could be worse in the future. U.S. facing hunger crisis as demand for food banks soars. And it's just funny that we have that kind of article in our own country. You know, we are the country, or we are the next country to be conquered by Rome, and it will happen. So as Passover, we need a nap. As Passover approaches, you know, like the Israelites, I think that we need to make preparations spiritually and physically, and get ready as the Passover comes, and read Exodus, and think about what they went through and what we may go through in the future, as we indeed will also have the plagues as well, as many of the other things that are paralleled in Exodus. So anyway, those are my thoughts, buddy? But I am very unhappy, and I need to eat or something. So anyway, I hope there was something in there that was good and information to help you on your Sabbath day. But now I think we should have Abel share something.
You can stop your share.
Stop my share? I can stop my share.
It should, yeah, there you go. There you go.
There you go. Yeah. So
There's
I know
Marvin.
that was kind of long, maybe, huh? I think Keith could probably share some interesting things on that topic as well, huh? And you did.
Well, the one I'm working on now goes to continuation of government.
Okay. Continuation of government. Oh, how
Getting
the
rid of the
government.
Constitution.
Oh,
Which is
gotcha.
coming.
Yes.
Mr. White also said that that's coming.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it will. And then we will grasp hands with the Roman Church and fall apart.
It was kind of interesting. I was sitting outside last night, and the things that I tell Brex, you know, he's 6 years old. He come out there down beside me, and he says, "Hey, Daddy, when are you going to put blood over our door?"
Yeah.
I said, "No,
Right.
Christ took care of that."